It's not as if she were a maniac, a raving thing. She just goes a little mad sometimes.
And I say, insect or man, death should always be painless.
She just goes a little mad sometimes. We all go a little mad sometimes. We all go a little mad sometimes.
I caught him, Sheriff. Wait, who is that? Billy Loomis. Sir.
Pardon me, I'm Loomis, Dr. Sam Loomis.
I think our friend Sam Loomis didn't know that Marion was here.
Oh, Sam, I hate having to be with you in a place like this.
Now just listen to me. I want you to go down the street to the Mackenzie's house. I want you to tell them to call the police.
Your car. Drive down to the Mackenzies.
We must be mad. Literally mad.
Watch a few movies, take a few notes. It was fun.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you're doing very well on this evening. This is the 85th episode. 85th? 85th?
85th.
You give that a go.
85th.
Yeah. Hi, chat. There's not just me here. I actually have waifu with me, and something I need you to do is let us know if the audio is okay. As funny as it would have been to ship waifu off into like the cold downstairs room with a different laptop to avoid, like audio issues, I decided we might actually have this conversation in the same room, looking at each other and sharing a mic.
So if you can hear me, do let me know. I mean, if you can't hear me, also let us know, but I won't be able to tell you to do that.
We're just waiting. I have set the latency quite low, so it will actually take chat quite a while to hear that and respond.
Excellent. Excellent. That's good to know. What ho, Fez?
Hello, Fez. Yes, I see people are in, and I've also seen people have been doing their homework, which I'm absolutely delighted by. Thank you so much, 70 Sue, doing your homework. Murgoot did his homework. John, did you get this watched? Em, did you do your watching? I'd love to know. Let's see how we're doing on that.
It looks like Em did.
Good. I'm very happy to hear that. Okay, this is... Oh, Mima's in. Hello. Yes. Gatsby is 100% going to make his presence known because his regular Thursday evening lap is not available. So he's probably going to come in here furious, playing Ride of the Valkyries.
Absolutely cantankerous.
Yeah, it's a risk. It's a risk that we're just going to have to ride out, aren't we?
We are indeed. There is nothing we can do about Gatsby. He will have opinions and he will let us know about them.
Yeah. All right. Chat is giving us a thumbs up. I think we're okay. Let us know if we have any problems, but it should be fine. And because there's just the two of us, really, we shouldn't have any bandwidth issues, which is fantastic. John Goris.
Shocking.
All right. There is only really one major spoilery thing that we will give hefty warnings for, but I think you can otherwise enjoy this discussion. So we'll warn you when there's a big spoilery thing going on, if you're bothered about that. Drinks this evening, what are we rocking?
It's a
Grenache, I think.
Yes, well, you picked it, so you should know. It's a red wine. It's very nice. And then possibly later on we might have some Old English mead. Sadly not homemade, but that one day we'll need to.
How amazing would that be?
Our own bees. That's what we need first.
Well, we shouldn't get too distracted because we're aiming for an incredibly efficient stream tonight. I mean, there's only two of us, so we should be super efficient, right?
We'll see.
It'll be fine.
I nearly left her hanging with completely dead air. That would have been beautiful.
No, don't do it, waifu. Don't do it. All right. So I'll just move. I'll say welcome. I'll do my regular shills, which is to say we're on YouTube, so you know what to do right now. If you aren't handcuffing that like button down to the bed so you can have your way with it before you
indulge in a non-consensual struggle snuggle fantasy with the subscribe button.
Nice. Absolutely.
Sinister.
Absolutely. Pop that subscribe button on your... No, we're going to stop now.
Yeah.
This is a bit too dark for all that.
TLDR, like and subscribe in a nice, pleasant, consensual, friendly way, and then put some nice burn gloves on afterwards.
Yeah, we've seen some pretty nice channel growth recently, which is an absolute treat. And I've got to say, largely down to, well, wonderful people clicking subscribe, but also a certain amount of help from the excellent Shrouded Hand and Actual Justice Warrior, who saw my video where I parodied him, but stood up for him at the same time. And that was really quite lovely. But otherwise, unfortunately, Susan doesn't share these videos around if people don't interact with the vids. It's a bit cringy to say it. So liking and subscribing really helps. The best thing I'd say is actually typing in chat. One, it shows interaction, which means Susan will share the videos around and we can spread the good word of Gatsby. But the other thing is I get to read what you're thinking, and it makes it for an interesting stream because I like to know what you guys are thinking. I like to know your takes on these movies. It's a treat. We don't want to just be telling you what to think.
Mr. GB, that's a very sinister.
Mr. Gently Benevolent, sir.
Neither gentle nor benevolent.
Disavow. Disavow. Goodness me. All right. Well, you've heard all that, and I'll move swiftly into the topic section of the evening, which is an absolute unforgivable abomination. This should not be allowed. It should be banned. It should be struck from the internet with absolute frenzy and no mercy. It is this. Have you seen this?
I didn't really pay attention to the trailer when it came on the other day, but I did see it mainly because we were watching something else on Netflix.
Yes, yes. Chat, you may not have seen this. There may be a lot of people wondering what the heck I'm annoyed about. But if you are not in the know, one of the big things I ask money for basically is I am trying to do a big series all about Blockbuster, its history, its rise, its downfall, and very importantly, its cultural impact. And I'm going deep with it. I'm going weird with it. It's going to be a challenging production that I'm really excited to do.
She's got a former Blockbuster employee handcuffed to our bed right now.
He is going to give up those corporate secrets or he isn't going home.
It's true. And there's an Alsatian kicking around somewhere.
Ooh, woo. So imagine my absolute horror when I see Netflix are trying to get in there and milk the nostalgia cow for Blockbuster before I can get my hands on its very 1990s teats. Why did I go for this metaphor? I'd started it and I couldn't stop.
You really could have done. You had the option not to finish that sentence. Also, Andrew Yang has apparently taken up acting.
Oh, Fez, disavow, disavow. So, yeah. I mean, this has flopped. It has a 25% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, but they are making a second series of it. But so it's not just me being offended and using it as a sly way to shill my memberships where you can support me on Subscribestar, but also here on YouTube, where although Subscribestar does put more money in my pocket and less money in Susan's, just casually mentioning that. It's not just so I can casually shill my project. It is just sort of a bit interesting that they're doing this. I'm trying to think how I led into this when we discussed it at dinner, but what I find interesting in this is effectively it's all levered around a brand and not a star. There are reasonably well-known people in this. JB Smooth, the tall black chap at the back. You probably know him if you know him from Curb Your Enthusiasm.
His surname's actually Smooth?
JB Smooth. He is awesome.
I hope he is smooth.
He is wonderful. He borderline took over the show. Curb Your Enthusiasm, that is. What do we got here? Oh, no. Murky.
But Mima is offering you an OG Blockbuster membership card.
Mima, I need this. I need this so much.
Or you will get the hose again.
Yeah, find a way to message me because I would totally take you up on that. I've already been scouring eBay for uniforms. I won't get derailed by this anyway. What I found interesting, they haven't sold it on a star, but they have sold it on a brand, which is kind of an interesting hook to build a show on, isn't it?
I think in some ways it's a trend we've been talking about for a while, about essentially monetizing nostalgia. I think then they know that probably, sorry, I've got a bit of a cough, dying of the coof. The sort of audience they've got for it are people who would probably remember going to Blockbuster and renting out the videos when they were kids, and therefore kind of seeing it come around, they're like, oh, I remember Blockbuster. It's essentially kind of member berries. It's you get to watch it and remember the kind of vibe of like what Blockbuster was like and what that meant for you as a kid. And it's kind of I think they're just trying to capture that spirit and get people to watch it. I've said the same thing about 3 times in a row. I'm on a loop.
It's fine. But going off that, it really does take it to a next level of brand worship. And I found that a little weird. Like, we've seen a few projects that are along these lines. Like, you've seen films being made about the making of certain films, or series being made about the making of other films and series, which is very weird and meta. But that's kind of already happened. But now this is just brand worship. And I thought, well, it got me thinking of another thing, because today was the day that the John Lewis advert came out. And we have already started treating brands like stars, haven't we?
I mean, any non-Brits in the audience are going to be very confused about why we're talking about the Christmas advert for a department store.
Detail this for non-Brits.
I mean, it's one of those things where to us it just seems so obvious that it feels like a weird thing to explain. But every Christmas, just after sort of bonfire night, lots of the big brands and businesses in the UK release their Christmas adverts. And for some reason, the John Lewis Christmas advert is a kind of absolute pinnacle of the Christmas season. It's kind of, I'm trying to think of what the equivalent of John Lewis might be in the US. It's quite upmarket. It's maybe kind of like a Macy's, possibly. I might be really exposing my lack of US cultural knowledge. But yeah, it's this sort of fairly posh department store. And yet for some reason every Christmas, it's a bit of an event where you all kind of want to see the advert and discuss the advert, because it's this, typically they're quite saccharine, they're quite emotional, they really tug on your heartstrings. They have some interesting, what's the word I'm looking for? Interesting reflections on modern Britain. And
that's a good euphemism.
The kind of traditional families that celebrate Christmas. And yeah, it's just a bit of a tearjerker. It's a bit of an excuse for everyone to feel a bit soppy and then go and buy some really posh stuff. Okay, Nordstrom's, the Alabastard, so it's not quite...
Nordstrom's.
That's useful to know. I was just trying to calibrate my posh department stores. But yeah, and so that advert came out today, and it was genuinely quite a good one. It had quite a good message. It really didn't advertise any products. It talked more about the foster care system, but, fair play, happy Christmas. But yeah, I think it's an interesting thing where the kind of that it's no one watches the advert to be like, oh, what Christmas treats have they got in store for us this year for us to buy? It's what's the kind of tear-jerky song we're going to weep over for Christmas.
And we are just pivoting off this because it's a little weird one, but I've not heard people talk about it, and it's an observation that Waifu had that I found quite interesting about your musical anchor nostalgia theory.
Okay, yeah. So again, talking about the kind of, I suppose, marketing nostalgia, we were in the pub a couple of weeks ago playing a board game, and I was listening to the music and thinking, oh yeah, I remember this. This was playing, this was really popular in the year I did my GCSEs. I was 16 when this came out. Oh, I loved this song. Oh, this one came out when I was 17. I remember that summer. This was really popular when I was 15. And then I was like, oh, they're playing this music because they know that their main clientele, their main punters, are going to be in their early to mid 30s now, and we'll hear this music and go, oh, do you remember that summer after our GCSEs? We were listening to this all the time. It's all about kind of creating that nostalgia and creating that nice moment of making you think about or relive perhaps presumably the best days of your life. Mine were mainly spent on a bus. But, you know, it's sort of, it was that realization of this isn't the cutting edge. I'm going to sound much older than I actually am. This isn't the cutting edge youth music of its day. This is music for like yuppie parents. And it was like, oh, I'm entering middle age with a bang, and its soundtracks is the Kooks.
Yeah, and we were saying this because in the John Lewis advert, they're playing a ballad version of All the Small Things by Blink-182. It sounds like a Richard Cheese cover. If you enjoy the old Richard Cheese and the Lounge Against the Machine, and it's quite a clever one because it's this musical nostalgia anchor that they're using, where all the people who are listening to, who are basically in some of their prime earning years right now, this was the song of their teenage years. So it's hitting them right in the nostalgia feels. It's getting those prime AB demographics ready to spend, talking right to them, activating their musical nostalgia. It's quite genius. Very, it's deeply subversive, you might say.
To be honest, I'm very much looking forward to, in 20 years' time, the John Lewis Christmas ad with the soulful acoustic guitar soundtrack of Cardi B's seminal work, WAP. I think that's going to be a Christmas tune for the ages.
Yeah, Fez has got it.
Sorry, I keep coughing.
Fez has absolutely got it. Yeah, that's it. I suppose there's another angle. Let's wrench this back onto topic before we close off, because there's a really sinister aspect to this, which is, okay, when I do this series, I'm going to actually show you that this is not true. So spoilers, but the general cultural consensus is Netflix killed Blockbuster. So Netflix has killed Blockbuster and has then picked up its corpse, skinned it, and is now wearing it like a skin suit. You know, putting wires through the limbs and saying, "Dance, monkey, dance for me." It's kind of sinister when you view it like that. And this is what people were saying about it. It's a very similar thing to how if you go in certain supermarkets, they'll have the faux market area, and they'll have pictures of greengrocer stalls or pictures from inside a bakery to make it look all authentic and homely. And it's like, realistically, the supermarket killed off those little shops. So activating nostalgia with images of them is kind of a shady dunk there. But when I make this series, I will show you that Netflix did not kill Blockbuster. So we can dispense with that myth eventually, but you can see why people have that take and say, it's in pretty poor taste for Netflix to just teabag the fallen like this.
Just dancing on its corpse.
Anyway, that is pretty much all I wanted to say about this abomination. Slide in a sneaky shill for my memberships, which are, of course, the easiest way for me to reward you and also raise funds for this thing. I have to build a set. That's going to be fun. It is going to be fun. I'm actually looking forward to it.
I mean, given I'm the one with all the power tools in the household, it's mainly going to be challenging for me. But
you are the butch one.
It's true. I am the butch.
Okay, I think we should move on and we should start talking about Mike Flanagan's excellent Gerald's Game.
I think indeed we should.
We're going to talk in very in-depth spoilers about the whole thing. There is one key moment that I think we should give an extra warning for when we get to it, because there's effectively a central mystery running through this film, which is, how is she going to escape? And that is something I would like to not spoil for you. The rest of it, I think you can still really enjoy the film if you know it, but there is the method of escape that I think is quite worth keeping as a keeping as a surprise if you can.
I also wonder whether it's worth us mega spoiler warning the identity of the dead heir.
Oh,
I just pulled
right.
a
Yeah.
very sensitive face.
There's some interesting stuff happening back here in Horror Mansions.
I'm trying to indicate the bit that I think deserves an extra spoiler warning.
Okay, I think I got
Without
it.
using words.
Guys, I
Yes,
really wish you could have seen that. That was
Mag-
the best face.
To be fair, Mergoots put it much more succinctly, which is around what's real and what's not. So I
Yes.
think if we spoiler when we're discussing whether things are real and not.
Yep. Okay, I will get us into it then. Gerald's game. Folks, we are going spoiler mode, and as ever, you will get the Guinness summary. Mima, you're getting lag. No. Oh, I hope it works out, Mima. All right. Waifu, how would you like to give us the pint of Guinness summary? I'm sorry, guys, if you've heard this already, but here we go. Let's imagine you were in a bar ordering a pint of Guinness and someone has heard you talking about Gerald's game and they say, "What's all this Gerald's game about? Do hurry up, my Guinness is being poured."
Heck. Hello, slightly demanding stranger in a pub. So Gerald's game opens with a middle-aged, older than middle-aged couple who've clearly been having marital difficulties, and they've gone to their lake house. They're clearly very wealthy. They've gone to their nice, luxurious lake house for a weekend away, just the two of them, to try and rekindle some romance. And Gerald, the eponymous Gerald, has brought along with him some handcuffs to make the weekend a little bit spicier. He's also brought along some nice fancy wine and food, and it's all very luxurious. The idea is they're going to have a very nice, private, delicious time together. And then he dies. I suppose that's not really a spoiler. It happens in the first 5 minutes, 12 minutes.
11. I think it was 12 minutes in. I mean, this is the whole premise of the film. Is
I'm in the middle of my
Yeah.
pouring the Guinness. So 12 minutes in, Gerald has a heart attack and dies, leaving his wife, played by the lovely Carla Gugino, handcuffed to the bed, and the keys are on a table quite far away. So how is she going to get out is the first big challenge. And then there's also some interesting things where there are potentially some quite interesting threats that come into play. One of which is a stray dog who finds its way into the house. The other is that, the house is left open, so potentially intruders could come in. She's in a very, very vulnerable position. And also there's the huge risk of her brain dying. Of her, no one will find her. She could starve to death there. She could, anything could happen. But alongside that, while she's in this deeply traumatic position, we also realise that she's got herself a much more complex kind of backstory and personal history that kind of adds really interesting layers to what's going on for her, and like why her relationship is the way it is, why she is the way she is. I think it's a really kind of fascinating, interesting, beautiful examination of trauma, really. And I think it's something that Flanagan does extremely well, is using tropes of horror to explore kind of real psychological issues. And I've managed to avoid, hopefully, spoilering the thing I pulled the face about.
I think I got it. Yes. It's, as you see, this image here is basically how Carla Gugino spends the entire movie.
Not quite the entire movie. There's 20 minutes potentially at the end.
Yeah. The question is, how does she get out of this scenario without dying? And as there's not much she can do, it's a real challenge for the story to keep this interesting. We've seen similar ones where someone is so darn limited in what they can do. Examples that come to mind would be Ryan Reynolds in Buried. He spends the entire film in a coffin. Or I want to say Colin Farrell in Phone Booth. That's quite a choice reference for anyone. I'm not sure many people saw that, but that was fun. He's kept in a phone booth because someone's going to snipe him.
Excellent.
It's a very big challenge for a director, but it's kind of where Stephen King's stories come alive. He is a bit of a master of basically taking nothing whatsoever and spinning a story out of it. Now, I think he really got this skill from his short stories, where he just have to make something really quite minimal into enough to carry a story. So he just finds little things that someone might think they see and be reminded of, and then they're reminded of it again, and they sort of elaborate, and then they start just like building off this until like there are whole characters coming off, having their own arcs off something that may or may not have ever been there in the first place. And it's quite a trick that he's mastered.
I mean, there's an interesting thing. It might have been Sylvia Plath. I might be making that up entirely. But an interesting point I remember reading about the difference between a poem, a short story, and a novel is that in a novel, a character might put a toothbrush down, and that's an interesting descriptive moment in a much broader plot. In a short story, the toothbrush may become kind of much more significant and tell you a whole lot more about what's going on in the story. And in a poem, the toothbrush is the poem. So it's that kind of that focus on the tiny details. And so a sort of short story kind of would focus on and draw a lot more out of, something that in another context would either be enormous or minute.
I think that's an interesting way of framing it. I'm also seeing that people have seen Phone Booth. Unexpected, guys, unexpected. John Gorris, that film was 127 hours.
And it's real. It happened.
I haven't actually seen it, but yeah. Similar thing idea. Again, incredibly minimal scope. You might also think Rope to an extent because it's all in an apartment block, but that when we're going to the level of an apartment, we're really expanding that scope.
Joe, quick point.
Oh,
it looks like she could get them off, but if you look at the kind of carvings at the top of the bedposts, actually, you see it when he first puts the handcuffs on her. There's no way she can actually get them up and over the bedposts, because otherwise that would be. And in fact, early on in the film, there's a sort of scene where she imagines herself just kind of she-hulking her way out of it like an absolute boss babe, and girls get it done, and she just wrenches the bed apart.
It is the thing that you are saying, like you are watching this film, and folks, back me up on this. I bet you thought, girl, just really try and pull your hand. Have you tried just like really pulling? Just like give it a really good pull. And they know you're thinking this. Mike Flanagan knew you would think this. And has that scene where she just tries it, just really tries to force out and imagines herself doing it and getting away, and then finds herself looking back at the real version of herself still on the bed. It's a brutal fantasy sequence. It's absolutely brutal.
70 Sue, you've just blown my mind.
70 Sue, you are ahead of the game. You are ahead of the game. Okay. Well, this is something we wanted to talk about quickly at the start before we get really into the details. Let's just quickly praise the design. Sue, you are 100% correct. This is the middle bit of the headboard is indeed part of the Oculus mirror, the laser glass, as it's known in the Flanagan canon. How come I can say Flanagan canon and I can't say mirror?
Da-da.
Ugh, terrible. Yes, this is the laser glass, effectively the antagonist from Flanagan's debut film Oculus from 2013 that we have covered and praised massively. And he gets little cameos for everywhere. Sue, you have done absolutely nothing wrong. We were going to lead into it. It's a beautiful detail.
And you've blown my mind because I hadn't picked up on that.
Oh, okay. I was also going to get you the now where is it? Sorry, it took me a while to find the exact frame. Got it. Okay, I'm going to warn you guys. This is going to look a bit bad, the next thing I show you. But here we go. I'll only have this up briefly. So this is her look of terror after Gerald has died and died upon her. But I want to direct your eyes to the book on the shelf. You will notice that is Midnight Mass. Midnight Mass is the dream project that Flanagan was trying to make happen. And so he seeded it in this film. He also seeded it in Hush, which is, again, excellent. Stars all his regulars. So this film has a book written by a character in another one of his films that is actually the story of a series that he got to make last year. Well, this year? I think it was this year, actually.
It might have been this year.
It came out this year. So when people talk about the Flanagan universe or the Flanaverse, it's not 100% insane. I mean, Mike Flanagan is a Stephen King fan, so I've had this up a bit longer than I wanted to, actually. I might move us on.
All right, Daddy.
He is a Stephen King fan, and so he is very comfortable with extended shared universes. I'm sure you're all thinking of the Dark Tower universe. And he actually gets a reference to the Dark Tower, and he gets a reference to quite a few Stephen King books in. So he references, I will just say, a character carrying a bag of bones. I want to say Bruce Greenwood, but that's not his name. Gerald. How did I forget his name? Gerald.
Clues in the title.
Gerald drops the iconic Dark Tower phrase, all things serve the beam. If you want to nitpick, it has nothing to do with the plot whatsoever and sounds really weird. But gosh darn it, enough people will like that Dark Tower reference and be absolutely fine with it. And of course, there are other ones, but the other major one is something that Jessie describes to Gerald.
Jessie is the woman.
Jessie is our main character, played by Carla Gugino. She references a vision that she had around the time of an eclipse of a woman looking down a well and the smell of pennies and or hennies. We weren't sure which we heard. And that is a direct reference to another Stephen King story called Dolores Claiborne. Now, that's a very low-key movie, very underappreciated, amazing star turn from Kathy Bates in it. And Murgoot's right, there was another one, yeah. She refers to the dog as Cujo. Yeah, absolutely. Why not? It's fun. But the really interesting thing with the Dolores Claiborne reference, and I'm sure a lot of you will know this, so bear with me, is that this was originally part of a trifecta, as I understand it. So it was meant to be 3 stories bound together, 3 women bound having a psychic experience all around the time of an eclipse. And then I gather it got broken down to just 2 stories that were meant to be connected. And then he eventually just wrote Dolores Claiborne and this as separate stories. But the references do remain. And I thought that was a really nice touch. And I've got to say, I would really love to see that movie. I would really love to see the sort of 2.5 hour condensed version where Dolores Claiborne and Gerald's game intersect. Because they have quite a lot in common in terms of their subject matter.
Which isn't the most YouTube-friendly subject matter, let's put it that way.
Yeah, I did tell you folks that this was an intense film. I hope that was sufficient warning. When you watch this, it does give you a warning that this contains very bad things happening to people and children, even if handled very tastefully.
Yeah, it's done incredibly well.
But I did see, very understandably, a lot of people just found that way too much.
It's a lot. I mean, in some ways, the fact that it's... Sorry, I was just distracted by Mr. GB. I think the fact that it's done so well is part of the reason why it's so hard to watch, because I think there are many ways in which handling similarly quite traumatic subject matter can be done so badly that it's almost comic. I now can't think of any examples, but I'm sure I've seen it done.
A Serbian film comes to mind. No,
I wouldn't really describe that film as comic. But yeah, I think it's one of those things where if it's done well, that almost makes it more powerful. And I think that's one of the reasons why the film is sort of deserves or needs a warning in a way.
Yeah. So those are some of our. We wanted to talk about the Flanaganisms. The other thing we of course have to mention, Mike Flanagan will constantly recast his favorites, and I absolutely love it. It makes his stuff really cozy. You're just waiting for certain people to turn up. So we have Carla Gugino here, we have Henry Thomas, we have his wife Kate Siegel. I think those are the only ones in this.
I think so, yeah. But one of the other things I love about Flanagan is, and it's sort of one of the themes in a way, is the kind of idea that the film is sort of about ghosts. Well, it's not really about ghosts, that's a darn lie. But I think he likes the idea that I think haunting and ghosts are psychological rather than kind of physical or literal. So it's the thing where, you know, she's haunted, she's seeing imagined versions of herself. And they sort of figure almost as ghosts in the film, but they're also not really. And I think that's something that he then kind of echoes in or certainly plays with a lot more in Bly Manor and The Haunting of Hill House. It's this idea that actually the ghosts aren't literal ghosts. They are more, you're haunted by what's happened to you. You're haunted by kind of the things you live with and the things you carry with you. And I think that's a really sort of elegiac and really elegant examination of what a ghost is and what a haunting is. I think it's wonderful. And that's one of the things I really, really love about Mike Flanagan.
Yeah, he's also really, really keen on sort of the child and adult versions of characters getting to intersect. Like he'll love to depict both of them and draw those connections there. It's really nice. I mean, in many ways, this is an early test run for his later Stephen King work. And it's also a decent test run for The Haunting of Hill House. Remembering this was made in 2017. It's 2 years before he gets to make Hill House. And he's handling interesting, challenging psychological material, doing really deep character work. The kind of thing that would end up serving him so well when he gets to The Haunting of Hill House.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we.
Sorry, I don't have much more to say beyond just I think I really like Flanagan as a director. He may have some particular slants and perspectives on modern world issues that I disagree with, but as a filmmaker and a storyteller, I think he's phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, that is worth saying on the old Mike Flanagan front, is that he's the kind of person who I would disagree with him on a fair amount, but I have never watched a thing of his where I felt his viewpoint made it unwatchable, or that you 100% had to be on board with that message for the story to make sense.
Yes.
And that nowadays is an achievement. I'm very aware that he's getting a lot of pressure to put a lot more explicit messaging in. And I don't follow him on Twitter for what he posts. But kudos to the guy, he makes great stuff. And I hope he tries to keep balanced, basically. But those are some of the details. I kind of want to get into the meat of this. Four indeed. Okay.
It's time to get the woman's perspective.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I am looking forward to you basically doing the Gerald did nothing wrong.
Which probably isn't the women's perspective that people were expecting on this film.
Yeah. I mean, do we want to do that, or should we deal with like some of the mechanics of the story quickly?
I feel like some of the mechanics... What mechanics were you thinking of?
I just thought setting up how the heck this film works. We've talked about how this film does a really good job with... Jessie has to both have these dialogues with projections, which all kicks off in this scene here when she's basically so desperate for Gerald to get up She just imagines he's done it. And then he points out to her observations she could make, which are quite, you know how I breathe, you'd have heard that, I'm not breathing, etc.
Yeah.
Pointing out to her what she already knows and has already observed and can infer, which sets up the puzzle-solving dynamic, which powers a lot of this film. This isn't just a woman having deep psychological introspection and assessment of her own life. It's her having to do that whilst being presented with a series of logistical challenges that are an absolute treat for anyone who loved Saw.
It's that kind of almost escape room, I guess, element of how is she going to get out of it? How is she going to keep herself alive? Because it's not just how is she going to get out of it, but there's sort of a point of she, as the sort of figments of her imagination point out to her, which is her sort of reminding herself, if she, when she realizes kind of quite early on that she can't just Hulk smash her way out of the problem, she's then kind of left with a situation of, okay, do I wait and hope that someone will come round in the next 2 or 3 days? She works out it'll be sort of 2 or 3 days before anyone might even be around. So there's a thing of her having to work out, okay, then I may need to try and keep myself alive until then. So how am I going to do that when I can't easily reach, how I need water, I need rest, but I also need to kind of keep my arms and legs moving so the blood flows. And so you can sort of see her working all these different things out, and it becomes a real kind of survival challenge, which powers the plot. Because otherwise, if it was just like, yeah, like you'll basically be fine until someone rocks up, then it would be an incredibly boring film. It's the thing of the urgency of keeping herself alive, and then also that kind of becomes an interesting added time pressure, which we'll get to later with a hefty spoiler warning. But it's that thing of she's starting to run out of time, so there's urgency, but at the same time she's also kind of being flooded with a lot of memories from her past. So it's kind of dealing with kind of trauma and flashbacks and complicated emotional situation, plus I need to not die. Which makes for a more interesting film than A Woman Got Chained to a Bed. Sounds like it would be.
Yeah. There's a certain amount of training the audience, which I love in this. So this conversation here where he trains her to work with observations, which is training the audience to work with them too, setting up the rules. It's a puzzle that you can solve, which is fantastic. Ultimately, you're wondering, how the heck does she get out of this? But one of the first things she's presented with is, you're going to die of dehydration if you cannot get there, if you cannot get a drink soon. And I don't know if I want to talk about how she solves it, but I was very satisfied with it. Should we just...
I think leave it at that almost.
We'll leave it that... Okay, we'll just say that is a puzzle she has to solve. And that is quite satisfying.
There are some... I suppose the one bit of that I will mention that I think works really well for it is she's been having this conversation in her head with the imaginary Gerald about their dysfunctional relationship, and particularly the kind of sexually dysfunctional element of their relationship, and how he was taking Viagra but wasn't telling her about it. And her in her own imagination says something like, but you're so glad he took those pills. And she's on the bed like, no, I'm not. Why, of course I'm not. I wanted you to tell me about, and thinks it's, a kind of further conversation about the sort of relationship breakdown. And it's actually, no, it's a reminder that when he took the pills, as they were about to get things going, he then put his glass of water on the shelf above her bed so she can reach it. But then from there, it's how does she then get it when she can't really move her hands? It's
not as easy as, it's just above. Like, they don't make it that easy, but they are training you to think about what you see and what's realistic. And I don't feel they cheat. Maybe one tiny moment, but we can quibble that. And then ultimately there is the big question of how she escapes. She does not, she manages to acquire water. We'll say that, and we don't need to do the method. But her actual escape at the end is just built up to, it's a central puzzle as the situation gets more and more desperate, and she basically realizes she has to get out there pretty much
Now or never.
now or never. They find a great way to introduce additional time pressure on her, which I think we might touch on
In a bit.
Let's just say that they add extra factors and extra fears that increase the time pressure, and ultimately she has to find a way to escape. And I don't want to break it down, to be honest.
No.
I want to leave it as a very interesting surprise, and I'm just going to say I found it incredibly satisfying. I found it extremely effective. For you gorehounds who were maybe getting a bit grumpy, like, oh, this is just she's just talking. Like, I know a lot of you love psychological horror, and that is so rewarding. But for you gorehounds, my goodness, do you get something satisfying?
Yeah, it pays off. Ugh.
You probably covered your face with a cushion, like, I can't look.
I've seen the film before, and even so, it's just like, absolutely not.
So I think, yeah, we're not going to do the detail because you folks, you know my policy. I tend not to directly show something if it is like the big payoff, because I think that has to be really enjoyed in the context of the full film. So I tend not to give you the full payoff shots, and I don't think I will do that here. And there's not it. Pretty much, it's enough to say it's a very satisfying, creative thing that does not cheat, that extracts a heavy price for it, but it is logical.
It's really well done, I would say.
Now, before going into, do you want to do the character analysis, or do you want to talk a little bit about one of the other things she sees, the Moonlight Man? Would you like to save that for the end?
I think save that for the end, probably.
Cool. GCF, I'll tell you right now, I absolutely love this movie, and I would highly, highly recommend it. If you like psychological horror, definitely. If you like Stephen King, definitely. And there is a massive payoff if you like a bit of gore. So I 100% rate this. I'm going to be giving this a massive score at the end. But I'll just tell you right now, yes, we're going to try and avoid spoiling it as much as possible for the sort
two
of
big bits.
Reveals. When this is it's kind of like, this is a film made of puzzles, and our main character is basically having to solve them to live. And I would feel like I would ruin the film for you if I told you some of the answers to those puzzles, so I'll just leave them satisfying.
I like Jeffrey Smith's comment. The last one.
Oh, yes.
I would want my wife to get out of the handcuffs, so the last impression people would have of me would be as a kinky so-and-so. Let's put it that way.
Oh dear. Yeah. I suppose it is a bit... I don't know if Joe is referencing it, but Joe made me think of Saw.
Oh,
a similar thing where you've got that big puzzle of how are you getting out of that. I won't lead us out of this, but when I saw Saw 3, which effectively presented the same puzzle as in Saw, but came up with a completely different solution to it, that was a heck of a cinema screening to be in. I was in a midnight screening in Germany, and a lot of Teutonic wailing. It was wonderful. Anyway. Right. Let's talk about do you want to make the case for Gerald as the hero?
Yeah. Well, okay. So I think the way I think the film and Flanagan and potentially Stephen King want us to look at the film and the characters, of Gerald in particular, is what a scumbag, what a nasty man. And that kind of is, I'm trying to think of the right way to get into this. So basically,
what's the vision of Gerald that we're given in the film? What's the takeaway you're meant to have?
Well, I suppose actually I think the way into that is that we're supposed to think of him as a misogynist prick who doesn't care about his wife. He's very kind of he doesn't understand her. Their relationship's broken down. There's not much love between them, and he's just a sort of a misogynistic ass. He's kind of irredeemable, and he's slightly ruined her life. Would that be a sort of fair summary in some ways of how the film kind of presents him?
Yeah, I would say so. He's got certain evil, irredeemable desires. Yeah, misogynist, drinky, cheating on her.
Yeah.
Patriarchal, basically.
Yeah, and I would say so. The film sets up essentially, or the story sets up that Jesse, okay, right, starting again. Sorry, lots of thoughts trying to work out the best order to put them in. But yeah, so the opening premise, the way the plot gets going is that, they're away on this romantic getaway to try and reclaim their relationship. And you see her packing her lovely new slip with the label still attached. It's new. She's trying to sort of help rekindle their relationship by putting a nice slip on and being kind of sexy and alluring for him. He packs handcuffs. So, there's already a slight mismatch of expectations, I think it's fair to say. But then obviously he handcuffs her to the bed and then has a heart attack and dies. And in the middle of her kind of having all these ghosts around her telling her how to escape, her sort of ghost version of herself, her imagined version of herself, turns to her and says, let's be honest, he put the handcuffs on. You've got the handcuffs on you now, but he isn't the one who put them on you, or something along those lines, which triggers a flashback to a genuinely really well done and well managed storyline that shows you that essentially when she was 12, just kind of hitting puberty, her father, I'm trying to think of essentially he didn't quite molest her, but it's sort of darn close. He trust me, GB, we're going to take a hard pivot away from Lacey Green in a second. But essentially her father sexually abused her. I'm trying to think of a Susan friendly way to put it. He entertained himself on the back of her dress. Is that while she's sort of sitting on his lap?
Yeah, he Clintoned the dress. I don't even like making jokes about it as we try and get around Susan.
Yeah. It's, I wouldn't be using such flippant terminology if I didn't think that we'd get kicked off YouTube. But basically, it's a sexual molestation of her as a child by her father. And you realise, or she sort of almost realises, chained to this bed, just how much she's been carrying this legacy of trauma and how much it's sort of stopped her and kind of affected her life. And then where I get very anti-Lacey Green is the film is presenting it like her father, Gerald, and then another male figure that we come across later are all roughly on a par in terms of how awful they are. That her father started traumatizing her. The third chap was kind of like the sort of final boss. And Gerald is a kind of equally to blame for ruining her life with his awful, misogynist, horrendous ways.
If I can, this is presented in quite a clever way visually. This is our opening shot of the bed from this angle, from above. Note the pillows. This is set up to be an iconic image that will get repeated. So this is our opening shot, which is meant to echo the bed she ends up in for most of the film. If I can get a good image of it, there we go. Forgive me for showing you that again. And then when we go back to her trauma, we get a shot that is, basically the same. And I am just struggling to find it, I'm afraid. It is not that one. Gosh and darn it. Where is that?
Is it down a bit? That one?
Is it that one?
No, it's
it is not that one. Tell you what. Oh, I'm not sure I loaded it up. Okay, I'll try and get another one up in a second. I'll keep that there, but they effectively echo it again.
Yeah, it's very Joe nice. He saffled her. I say nice.
Oof.
Have you just closed the window we're streaming from?
I don't know. I've just downsized it, so we should be okay.
There we go. All right. So yeah, that was a bit of a detour, but yes, essentially he kind of.
Sorry, there's the other shot again. Hopefully after a little bit of delay, you can see how those images tie together to effectively tell you visually her situation has been constant. She's always been in the same situation since she was 12, all the way through to the present day.
And she's a woman who's, she's been victimized by men all her life, and that motif is kind of just all the way through, and only by kind of busting out of her handcuffs can she break free of awful men. However, I don't think Gerald is in any way as bad as her father or the other chap we'll get to in a second. And I think it's, Bilbo, you're not wrong, women computering.
Wham in tech support, hello. Have you tried calling someone else?
Yeah, so the way I see it with Gerald is that actually he there's the kind of locker room talk. So there's some sort of comments about how she has over the years overheard him making some deeply toxic jokes to potential clients, that he occasionally is distant and potentially has been cheating on her. But the thing is, if you only ever look at it from her perspective or from a very Stephen King-y perspective, given his politics, then you think, yes, gosh, what an arsehole this guy is, how terrible, how sexist, how, what a misogynist knob, toxic masculinity, yada, yada, yada. But if you look at it from Gerald's perspective, he has married this younger woman who clearly never really, she's never opened up to him about this very traumatic thing that happened to her.
She makes it clear that she never talked about it and never told him.
And so therefore, he's not a mind reader. And, there's an interesting sort of slight side discussion where I think women expect men to interpret what's going on without them having to spell things out. And I think that's often the butt of many jokes, but it's a very real thing where women sort of expect men to deal with emotions in the way that women do. And men don't. Men are, I probably sound like I'm making some awful sort of stereotypes here, but I think men do tend to be a lot more blunt, a lot more logical, a lot more just tell me what's wrong, tell me what the issue is. Whereas women, I've wanted you to guess, essentially. I wanted you to know without me having to tell you. And I think that's the trouble. She never told him about what happened because she was traumatized. And I think that's a very fair and intelligent depiction of trauma, that it did freeze her up, and that kind of thing will happen. That's PTSD for you. That's childhood trauma. But at the same time, therefore, how is he supposed to know what's wrong? If she can't open up for whatever reason, how is he supposed to just mind read and figure out that's why she's frozen him out? And she's essentially, you realise, quite early on in their relationship, turned the sex tap off. He pays for everything. There's never any mention of her working. They don't have children. So she's got this incredibly luxurious lifestyle. He's clearly working so hard that he's still on the phone to, his work and his clients at the point when they're arriving for their holiday.
There's also an explicit bit where she basically admits to herself that she was dishonest about having kids and not wanting them.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting... By the way, I should focus. We aren't actually doing Gerald did nothing wrong here, but we are problematizing the narrative, as you would say.
Yeah.
And digging a little... it's... I don't think this reading was ever intended by Stephen King or Mike Flanagan, who I think is quite increasingly open about his politics. But these are interesting things that we can draw from the reading that are blind spots in the narrative that are quite interesting to look at.
Yeah, and so to carry on with my rant, because why else would you get me on here? It seems to me like what's happened is she has to a certain extent, and the part of me that used to be a hardcore feminist is cringing here, but to a certain extent, she's kind of sponged off him. He has paid for everything financially. He works clearly very hard. She doesn't work. And not that you should necessarily be obligated to have sex, particularly if you don't want to in a relationship. But at the same time, it's not unreasonable to desire or want a certain amount of sex with your partner that you've married, because that's part of a healthy relationship. That shouldn't feel weird to say. And it's the fact that she's sort of turned it off and made it kind of his fault, to me, is quite crappy.
I think maybe a way of phrasing it that can win more people over is that couples have a duty to meet each other's needs in good faith. And that's not saying you have to sort him out as soon as he comes home off shift.
Yeah, be down on your knees when he opens the door.
Take the hat in one hand and the Johnson in the other. We're not saying that. I mean, it would be a bonus, but, that's some good wife in there. But it's more, we are dealing with someone who, in the own narrative, has just basically shut things off and shut down.
And frozen
for
him out.
Understandable reasons. But there wasn't a good faith attempt to resolve that.
Yeah, and I would say it's when you're in your 40s, if unresolved childhood trauma is still causing you significant difficulty, which it clearly is, then you kind of have a responsibility to go and get therapy, basically.
She's not the bad person.
She's not a bad person.
But there is definitely, how can I say, there is a certain onus to when this is disrupting your life so much and disrupting your marriage so much, to sort that out. And she would certainly be in a position to get therapy and get help. I mean, we're seeing how far we can take this narrative. 70 Sue is pointing out this interesting thing that we have to remember. We largely deal with her projection of Gerald when she's working through some very deep trauma, and she makes some other connections that I think are spectacularly unfair. And so we have to take these remembrances, which are going to be selective, with a pinch of salt. But what we actually definitely see of Gerald is definitely not good.
Yeah, and I would say moving kind of into that is what you do see of him is, I suppose if I were going to, I think we've said in the context of their relationship, he's not entirely the bad guy here. The way I read that weekend is they've kind of both gone, look, there's a massive problem in our relationship. This can't continue. Something needs to change or the relationship is over. And so they've agreed on this weekend away. And you can tell that he, in the script, it's clear that he's basically taken responsibility for organizing it. So he's the one who's organized what they're eating. He's the one who's sorted out getting the place sort of cleaned and the garden sorted before they go away. He's got the fancy Kobe beef, actually, from Kobe.
That's my favorite detail in the script, because I can just imagine any guy who's really tried to do a great job would have looked into the steaks and done the research. And if it was, so this is Kobe, but if it was Wagyu, he'd have been like, this is Wagyu ribeye. Do you know, I looked into how they made this. This is the most luxurious thing. These are the technical details of it. Yeah. I want you to know that I looked this up.
And to me, that's a real sign that actually he does care and he's trying really hard. I feel sorry for Gerald. And then we get into the bits that Sue's pointing out here, which is where I'm trying to work out how to phrase this. We've got various friends who were into certain activities, let's put it that way. And therefore, one of whom you liked to overshare, and I lived with her for a long time and learned a lot of things. So that was fun. But effectively, yeah, there's a sense at which he's clearly got some particular kinks, some particular urges, things that, he wants to do and that turn him on. Which would be fine if he was with a partner with whom he had discussed it, who he wasn't massively triggering, and who was okay with it and was up for giving it a go. They've they sort of have this discussion where she's saying, you know, you said you wanted to spice things up. I didn't think this is what you meant. And he was like, well, what did you expect, essentially?
What we see there is, I think what we actually see is a massive failure to communicate and be open with each other. But the film tells you it is 100% bad man Gerald.
Yeah.
Which I think we can look at it a bit more complex than that. And it's tricky when we have had kind of decades of liberal commentary. I'm thinking particularly of Dan Savage comes to mind, or I'm sure Lacey Green as well would tell you that these fantasies are okay. And I know Dan Savage in particular will point out that she kind of condemns him for cheating on her.
Yeah.
But he's subtle about it. He slips away, and she has he stayed in the marriage. He supported her. He's absolutely spoiling her. I mean, I think there is a bit of quite an interesting image here that she's giving $200 steak to a random doggo. And this doggo is a good boy.
A good lad.
He's a very good boy. But, there's there's something in the fact that she's just giving it away and he had to work for it.
Yeah.
She's kind of, I don't know, there's something in that. But, sorry, to come back, it's like Dan Savage would tell you that in that situation where you've been cut off from what you need from the marriage, if playing away is what you need to do to stay in the marriage, then that would be okay.
Yeah.
But I think that's a complexity the film doesn't really want to look at.
No, because it doesn't want to look at anything that might potentially exonerate Gerald. And I would essentially say, like, the issue for me with how Gerald acts is that, when she says, she's clearly quite alarmed by the handcuffs, she's not keen on it, and, expresses concern, he carries on regardless. And that, to me, is very kind of, that's the problem, really.
That's definitely not justifiable.
Yeah, that's not justifiable. He's not kind of, he's not actually sort of responding to her and connecting with her. And that, at that point it crosses the line from, hey, let's have a bit of kinky role play, into, whoa, dude. And so in many ways it's probably quite good for them both that he had a heart attack at that point. That's a weird thing to say, but it's kind of like that would have gone somewhere extremely unpleasant otherwise. But I think it's that kind of, the issue for me is where Gerald messes up is not, I would say, anywhere near as bad as her dad. And it's sort of more of a failure of communication and a failure of connection. And that he's essentially identified the problem in the relationship as the lack of sex. So he's focusing on curing the lack of sex. Whereas potentially, actually what would have helped the relationship is more of a, sort of a sort of romantic, how can I put it, sort of more romantic weekend away where they do lots of talking and thinking about how they're doing, and sort of connecting emotionally might have meant that she felt more comfortable with trying some of the things he wanted. But going straight from, let's get out of the car, feed expensive beef to the dog, now I'm going to drag you inside and chain you to the bed, it's like, that's not really going to get her, for some reason the only phrase I can think of is juices flowing.
Oh, madam, this is a family-friendly stream.
This film is extremely family unfriendly. I mean, the
there's
dad
an obvious no. Don't do it. Don't do it. We both thought that joke, but don't make it. Okay, folks, I'm gonna raise the tenor of this stream. It's getting a bit in the gutter. It's getting a bit. Waifu is bringing us down, folks. Boo, boo, and indeed hiss.
Shall I go and get my French maid costume on?
That is for members only. Thank you very much.
Join the channel.
I want to point out an absolutely fantastic visual metaphor here. This is one of the things that you chaps like to call massive reach. That's it. So
is it a gay reading of Gerald's game?
Gerald's on the game. Ooh-wee. No, it's around this imagery of the eclipse. Now, why on earth, why of all things, are they doing this in an eclipse? What is the point of that? I submit to you folks that it is an absolutely perfect visual metaphor for what is going on here. An eclipse is where your sudden daytime, where everything should be normal, suddenly gets darkened for no reason. This is the moment when the eclipse happens, when her father basically ruins her innocence. And you've got the thing of this sudden moment of darkness overtaking the light. And the other thing with an eclipse is you can't look directly at it. You know, you have to use these glasses to even get a rough impression of it, because you literally just can't look at the eclipse. And that is how Jessie treats this incident. She can't look directly at it. Oh no, that is...
Sue,
no. I can't unsee that now, but no, the point is, this is something, the eclipse, you cannot look directly at. And Jessie spends her life not looking at this incident, avoiding it, not being able to consider it. So absolutely fantastic visual metaphor. We absolutely need St. Thomas Aquinas. If only he would come and bless us dream. We haven't sworn. We've been... You notice how when it's you and me, the swearing isn't there. I love that.
The filthy jokes improve.
Occasional filth. But I would hope St. Thomas would be proud of us. Anyway, wonderful visual metaphor. I sort of feel we should now go to the bit where we have to kind of complain about the film quite a lot.
Yes, I mean, the one thing I'll finish with my other reasons why Gerald is still partially an asshole.
Sorry, please.
I think I've done most of them, which is he's not on the same scale as the child molesting father or the chap we're going to get to in a second. The other thing I would just say is, like, the sort of from, as I say, the friends we have who have specialist interests would say it's a very rookie error, I understand, to get actual handcuffs. I think someone in chat mentioned earlier, it's the thing of get something, if you're a newbie to it, get something that's quick release. And the fact that he's like, no, I want the big butch handcuffs is a sign. It's quite a nice character study, actually.
I remember us talking about that, and you said, oh, you made that technical point. And I said, yeah, but that also the metal handcuff, she's going to wreck that bedstead. She is absolutely going to ruin the woodwork. I wasn't even joking. I was upset. That's a lovely bed. She's going to knacker it.
Yeah, it was interesting that I was focusing on, like, he's made a rookie error. There's a safety risk there. She'll never get out of those should anything happen to him. Whoop. And you were just like, but the antique furniture, which tells you a lot more about us than we perhaps wanted to reveal on stream.
It was a beautiful bit of detailed woodwork, and she's going to wreck it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I will add a quick chicken anecdote, Sue, which is that I remember the 1999 eclipse in Cornwall. It was a cloudy day, so it wasn't, we didn't see the sort of eclipse clearly. But yeah, it wasn't red for us, so I think that's more just an angle of the sky. But because it got dark and then got light again, a bunch of chickens in the farm we were staying at laid twice, because they were very confused by the sun, and we're just like, all right, off we go. Which actually, now I keep chickens. I wonder whether some of them were just like, oh, I'm going to wait a bit and lay later in the day. But I like the idea of just a bunch of slightly confused chickens going, oh, bloody hell, that day was quick.
Oh, dear. You did raise an interesting point there, that the film very explicitly does basically equate the crimes of Gerald and the crimes of her father. So there's a line, his handcuffs were secrets and Gerald's were comfort, which is pretty bloody awful. I would say equate those.
I would say it's an incredibly insulting line for any survivor of childhood sexual abuse is, oh, this woman having a fairly comfortable, if emotionally dead marriage is the same as a deep trauma that destroys your mental health for the rest of your life. These two things are basically the same.
Yeah, it does get worse. It does get worse. So I think we've skipped over one of the big things we didn't want to spoil, and so we're not going to spoil it. the method of escape is very satisfying. But there's another thing that we're going to have to talk about.
Farewell, JFC.
Bye, JFC. Thanks for dropping in, man. Good to see you. Watch this film if you haven't already. It's a beauty.
Oh,
even though we're about to absolutely dunk on it. Oh, sorry. 70 Sue, can you help us? What was the one you were confused about?
Was it the one about his handcuffs were secrets and Gerald's were comfort?
Right.
I think.
Yes. Okay. So if that is the line, it's quite nicely done, even if we massively disagree with it. And it so Jessie is having a regular dialogue with basically projections, figments of her imagination, you might say, versions of people she knows, including an idealized version of herself. And the idealized version stays like perfect makeup, whereas she's get increasingly like
disheveled,
dehydrated, freaked out, messy, etc., bruised, horribly bruised on the wrists. It's a wonderfully unglamorous performance. And when she's making the equation, she's basically, she says to herself, basically, the handcuffs never came off. Or sorry, Gerald didn't put the handcuffs on. And what she means is her father locked her into a way of being when he abused her. And she effectively never, that sort of restrained her.
And that the comfort being the handcuffs is essentially because her life with Gerald was comfortable. Somehow it's equating the fact that her life with him was comfortable and felt safe and secure, even if emotionally barren. So she never left, and therefore I think, to be honest, that line is basically blaming him for her never actually trying to heal herself from the trauma. The comfort kept her locked into traumatized ways of thinking and being.
Yeah, it's she was not herself. She was not free to be herself because effectively she had to be who Gerald wanted her to be, which I do have to say is a massive amount of BS. It's total cope.
And it's a huge thing to blame him for. It's like, no, sorry, I can see why that would happen. I can see why it is potentially scary to address those sorts of things in your past, but don't blame your husband for that when he has no idea that's in your history.
There's also a very sort of like 2016, someone said bad, offensive, edgy joke, therefore evil.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, that's an absolute reach. So yeah, it's a weird equation they make, and they double down on it later, which I think we'll get into. So
let's get into Moon Man.
We've talked about the threats that she encounters. She's dehydration. Will she last? She's got the stray dog who's come in and starts eating Gerald and will eventually go to her. And late in the night, when she's having all these, I guess we could say hallucinations.
Yeah.
Let's say. Hallucination doesn't seem quite right, but let's say she's seeing things. We'll call it seeing things. She sees something else Gerald warns her about because she's so alone and vulnerable. That's when the ghouls and monsters of the world come to prey on people, and they'll find her because of how vulnerable she is. And that's when she ends up getting a visit from another character, the Moon Man. Oh, sorry, no, wrong one. It's the Moonlight Man, isn't it?
Big difference.
Sorry guys, messed that up.
I prefer the other guy's rap work.
Oh dear, disavow. I obviously wouldn't know anything about that. So this is interesting. This is a guy with actually quite an interesting horror pedigree. It's this chap, Carla. Now, I'm just going to look that up because I'm pretty darn sure he is Hills Have Eyes. Help me out. Near, where are you? Okay, I'm wrong. Never mind. Okay. A man who is at least well known in horror circles and genre circles. Darn it, I was so sure he was
in the Addams Family.
Yeah. Anyway. He has got a very interesting presentation, Mr. Moonlight Man. classic Stephen King character, weird oddball creation with very specific characteristics. So here, deformities, very pale, holding a bag full of bones and trinkets. It's amazing. It's the creepiest damn thing.
It's beautiful. It's a very Flanagan appearance as well, because she sort of comes to almost in the dark and looks sort of vaguely at the corner, and you sort of vaguely think there's a sort of shape by the curtains, but the camera pans away, and then it encourages you to sort of look back, or she sort of looks back at the corner, and you're like, oh god, there's a ghost there, and it's just this chap just sort of standing in the corner. And then the oh Joe
Oh no.
But the sort of question becomes, is he real or is he a figment of her hallucinating imagination? And that's I find that quite intriguing in many ways. I would say, are we going to spoil this?
It becomes the big ticking clock. It becomes the big ticking clock. The reason she absolutely has to get out of the house. Could she last another day on the water she's got access to? Yes. But the main thing is she's worried about the Midnight Man who's going to, the Moonlight Man who's going to effectively claim her bones and her wedding ring. She breaks free. Again, we will not spoil how. It's awesome. And she sees that he has arrived, and it is one of the most tense blooming moments I've seen in a long while. But she walks up to him in a kind of fever and hands over the wedding ring, which is obviously a very symbolic. It's the end of an era. She's drawn it to a close. She doesn't need it anymore. And it's also kind of like a Caron style.
Yeah, paying the ferryman.
Pay the ferryman, exactly. Now you are left. He is such a weird character, such a classic Stephen King. Is any of this happening creation? It's beautifully ambiguous. She leaves the house. She's in a terrible state. She does get to drive out, and she crashes her car. And after she's crashed her car, she ends up in a state that, blood down the face, looking a heck of a lot like Carrie. And my goodness, folks, I wish the film ended there. We are going full spoilers, deep spoilers. It won't ruin the film for you, but, we will talk about this. So if you don't want the very ending of the film spoiled, then you can duck out now and no one will judge you. But this cost the film several burgers, if you ask me. Okay, would you like to lead in from this, from what we learn after she has escaped?
Yeah, so in a very clumsy bit of storytelling and filmmaking, the last part of the film is her writing a long letter to her younger self, explaining that she realized that sort of after the police investigation of the house and all that sort of stuff, they discovered that basically they went back to the house and realized that her wedding, like, they never found her wedding ring. So she's like, that's a sign that the Moonlight Man was real, because if it had all been a hallucination, then they'd have found it on the floor somewhere. And so she's like, this guy must be real. And then later, police investigation in Louisiana discovers this guy with acromegaly who's deeply disturbed as well as deeply deformed, who is bursting in, robbing graves and stupping corpses, mainly male corpses, and generally taking part in a variety of depraved acts, and they eventually catch him. And she has this real girl boss moment when she sort of realizes he's real and he's been caught, and she doesn't need to be afraid anymore. And she marches into the courtroom, which, their courtroom security is incredibly lax, marches straight up to him and is just like, I can't even remember what she says, but it's essentially along the lines of like, I'm not afraid of you
She
anymore.
says you're a lot smaller than I remember.
Which, if you look at it as a kind of metaphor for recovery from trauma, I guess that's quite a nice metaphor of like, once she's looking dead at it and it's in a place where she's safe, then actually she can cope with what happened to her and it is smaller than she remembered. But in the context of some kind of weird girl boss moment where he's on trial for things that have, just incredibly depraved things, he did nothing to her, really. I mean, he loomed in her house and was quite sinister and creepy, so he potentially would have done something to her. I'm on a massive detail. Either way, it feels really odd that her kind of moment of emotional like triumph is addressing him in the courtroom when really he's not the chap that she's had an issue with. And then the fact that as Chloe's put up on screen here, they kind of link him, this absolutely depraved, monstrous figure, with her father, who is also depraved and monstrous, I would say, and with poor bloody Gerald, who, he's crass. He was potentially about to do something irreversible in their relationship, but he was basically emotionally clumsy and a bit disconnected. And occasionally made some sexist jokes. He's not on a par with a grave-robbing corpse rapist.
No, it's an unfair equation. And what's really weird is just when she's driving away, actually, there's a kind of sweet moment where she actually does a nice wave goodbye send-off, which is this. This is actually a lovely tender moment. And it's it has that feeling of bittersweetness, the way it's handled. She's not hating Gerald, but it's like she's saying goodbye to him. And then you follow that with this very different vibe girl boss montage. And I'm afraid I have to call it like the girl boss addendum or the girl boss epilogue. Now, this is something I've got to restrain myself because I could talk about this forever, but there's a very weird vibe of taking, say, the Moonlight Man, a mysterious, basically fantastical character, and then saying, oh, actually, he was an odd dude with a condition called acromegaly. And that's got this weird vibe to it. Like, he's severely disabled and a bit of a danger to himself and others. It kind of makes me feel a bit of pity for him when she goes up. He easily breaks free of his restraints and talks in a very high-pitched, childish voice. And to me, he becomes quite an object of pity. I'm not saying he's safe and cuddly. I'm not saying give that man a job in mother care. I am saying it's a little hard to explicitly name his disabilities and then call him a monster again.
Yeah, it feels very not 2017. It's that kind of, it's an interesting point that I don't know how far I go along with, where like, the version of The Witches that I think came out last year or the year before.
Yeah.
And there was massive controversy because they'd created The Witches to be accurate to Roald Dahl's description of them as having very kind of deformed, clawed hands. And the way they'd done this looked quite similar to an actual condition that some people have that I don't know the name of, but where people are born with quite deformed hands, essentially. And they were like, lots of activists were like, this is awful. You're equating being a witch and a monster with a disability that I have to live with. There's a lot of sort of stereotypes and hate and sort of, not hatred, but phobia or sort of, I'm trying to think of the right word, sort of scorn towards people with these types of disabilities. And you're using them for horror. That's awful. How dare you? Lots and lots of activism about that. And a lot of the time I'm kind of like, this is just how humans tell stories.
It can be massively overdone.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It can be massively overdone.
But this one kind of feels like that response would be a bit deserved, where they've been like, hey, this guy has, I mean, to be fair, Sue, he's arguably he's worse because he's broken into graves and hello, Gats.
Hello, lad.
Slightly creepy moment to come in.
Hello, my
but
love.
he's like, yeah, he's done some bad things, but he's clearly got some, mental disturbances or sort of mental delay, developmental delay. There we go. You know, and it's kind of going, yeah, he's an absolute monster. And it's the thing of presenting him as this kind of slightly fantastical sort of creepy figure in the moonlight is one thing, but then, as you say, explicitly naming his disability and like making a big thing of like, oh look, it's scientifically accurate, and also he's a grave robbing rapist. You're like, whoa.
That already makes his character quite weird to deal with. I can't get away from feeling quite a lot of pity towards him.
Yeah.
But then the other problem is she comes up now. She has received basically millions from a settlement after Gerald's death because, you know, he was wealthy. He had life insurance. The firm paid to keep everything quiet. So she's had a ton of money. You might say she's a bit privileged. And she strolls into court to dab on a retarded guy who's already in handcuffs and going to, like, the Moonlight Man, I'm sorry, I forget his real name, is not, he's not innocent. He's not a sweet guy, but she has little connection to him. He hasn't really wronged her. And she just strolls into court to dab on him.
Yeah, for her girl boss moment.
For her girl boss moment. And it's really weird. And he is nothing like her father. He is certainly nothing like Gerald. But this film just sort of equates them all. And this is like, this is her victory. And it's not even her victory. She didn't do this. The system is jailing him. You did nothing. This is a really, it just feels completely ripped from the reality of the story.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm getting this all wrong, but it feels like it's a completely different writer and a completely different film.
It does feel incredibly clumsy. And I really don't like the kind of narrative device of the letter to herself. In some ways, there is a nice idea of like, she's almost looking back in time and reassuring herself that it will be okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sue.
Sue, sorry if we have we're going rapid fire here. I don't want you to think we said that. I'm sorry if that came out, but I hope we stress like we're not. I think we're in the same place. Like he's definitely not innocent, but it just feels a bit bad dunking on the dude.
Yeah,
you know?
And particularly dunking on him as part of the mechanism of like, look at this mad bint recovering from trauma. And then the thing of like, oh, she's writing some nice letter to herself. In some ways is a nice thing about, you know, sort of recovering from what she's been through. But there's a point that you and I made earlier, which is that, again, this might not be the world's most easy point to get across. What happened to her as a child is horrific and awful and traumatizing and terrible. But there's a certain point at which she's kind of presenting, you know, she sets up this foundation to help kids who've had similar experiences.
Danger, Will Robinson.
And it sort of seems like she's there going, you know, hi, deeply traumatized kid, we can relate because I know what you've been through. And it's like, that's not ever really going to help someone who's currently living with trauma. It just feels very kind of, I don't know, narcissistic. I'm just judging this poor woman really harshly.
Well, I'm afraid it does come across, it just comes across really bad at the ending, and it feels like a completely different movie that I don't like. And I would honestly want to just cut the film off after the car crash when you know that people are coming to help her and she's safe. I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
I would love that ending. She's made it out. That's kind of all we need. But then this weird thing where she comes on and gets a victory on someone basically unrelated, re-slanders poor Gerald, and then literally puts on sunglasses and girl bosses out stage center. It's so weird.
Yeah.
There is a nice touch, let's be honest. We did enjoy this when she talks about her foundation is helping like girls and boys That was nice. That was a nice
Yeah.
acknowledgement. I enjoyed that. I thought that was nice to add in.
That was a nicely done thing that it's, it's often overlooked. And I think it's important. I mean, that is one thing that I will give this film massive props for, is its portrayal of some really dark subject matter in a film that could otherwise be quite sensational. It's like when you look at the premise of the film, it's like a woman has a load of hallucinations while chained to a bed that she can't escape from. And you're like, and it's also, yes,
Gatsby.
That, and it's also a really sensitive, complex, nuanced portrayal of someone living with post-traumatic stress. And it's like, those two things don't feel like they marry up, and yet somehow it works. And the Enreeb, you're right. There is a nice thing where you can kind of see that the eclipse is fading away. And the eclipse is almost like a metaphor for the darkest things in her life.
Yeah, the darkness has passed. Effectively, is what it's saying.
That's an interesting. If you read it as a dream sequence, that ending, I prefer that because it makes the ending a bit less crap.
Yeah, I would. I mean,
Should we do our scores on the doors?
We're talking Mike Flanagan adapting Stephen King, being a good teller of Stephen King stories. Is it a Stephen King story if you don't absolutely spaff the ending up the wall at the last second?
That is true. That is true. As the joke, his little cameo in It Too, and he even says, the sort of Stephen King standard in It Too. He's like, yeah, I can't write endings to save his life. You're like, yeah, fair play.
John, based. Yes.
Based and spiced. Joe, I'd watch that sequel.
Oh no. Oh no. Joe, no, don't be dropping dog pills. Not on this channel. There's just, we'll do scores, because otherwise I'm just going to go on about how misjudged this is. There are three massive guys, or two massive guys, having to hold the Moonlight Man back. And she goes up to him like, yeah, you're not so big in real life. And he's like, huh, who are you? But everyone is doing the work for her.
Yeah.
He could just like shove those guys aside and say 1v1 me. It's art.
I'd like to see the two of them in a boxing ring. That should be the ending.
Congrats, you are very empowered. The system is doing everything for you, and you earned millions from your husband's job. Congrats.
Feminism.
Very independent, much heroic. Yeah. These sound like bitter criticisms, and they are only towards the ending. I hate the ending. It bugs me every time.
Can we take a moment to appreciate just how hot the guy who plays her dad is in that shot?
Danger Will Robinson. Henry Thomas, yeah.
Smoking hot.
It's interesting seeing him cast so darkly, it's because he's usually in sweeter roles. And obviously Mike Flanagan loves him, brings him back constantly. Interestingly, he also played the Jack Torrance ghost in Doctor Sleep. I'm not sure massively convincingly, but what can you do? And I don't think we really liked the end of that film either.
It's a Stephen King film. Were we ever going to like the end?
Yeah, I think we probably shouldn't get ourselves pulled off in that direction, because we're aiming for a really efficient stream.
We're close. We're only a bit overdue.
Super Nanny's going to give us a bonus. All right. I think we should probably girl boss our way out of this. She pulls on sunglasses as well.
It's so crass.
Okay. Waifu. I'm just saying, you remember how Dharma got all those proposals and Bundy got all those proposals?
Oh, don't get me started on that creepy trend. There's merch.
I'm just saying.
You can get merch that says something like,
Dharma, I barely know her.
No, it's, I want you to something me like Bundy and eat me like Dharma. And it's t-shirts for women to wear.
Are women like this?
Women need to stop. I'm calling for a complete shutdown of all women until we can work out what the heck is going on.
Oh dear. Okay, waifu, would you like to give us your closing thoughts and score on Gerald's game? And chat, we'd love to hear from you too. I know someone actually gave a really early score. I'm going to look for that now.
I think it was Slim, possibly.
I think it might have been Slim giving a score. I'm going to look for your score, Slim.
Nice early score. So, I think if we ignore the ending, then it's probably an 11.5 out of 12 film for me. I think it's
11.5.
Yeah, if we ignore the ending.
Ooh.
Because the tension is gorgeous. In many ways, I would say that once you know that Moon Man is real, Moonlight Man, different person, very different. I want that remix of a film. But anyway, once you know that the Moonlight Man is real, actually the scene where he appears in the corner is so much more tense. Because the first time you see it, you're like, oh, she's probably imagining that. And it's only like a scene or two later that you realize that he is real. Whereas when you know that he is real all the way along, it's just like, oh God, that is so creepy that he's just there and she's so vulnerable. And so for me, there's so much tension throughout the film. And the scenes with her dad that like you kind of flash to it and back from it and flash to it and back from it a few times, and it builds up, and it's just so, it's horror, but it's psychological horror, and it's I don't know, I really love it. I think it's beautifully done, really beautiful examination of trauma. It's very elevated horror, to steal a line from Scream, and then it just spaffs it up the wall with the ending. So I would say the ending kind of makes it a bit of an 8, probably 8 out of 12. Probably a really high quality vegan patty, possibly a Kobe beef from Kobe.
From Kobe?
From Kobe.
Ooh.
I just also I think possibly, it's certainly maybe a 7.5 because it done Gerald dirty. So 7.5 to 8 for the ending and for doing Gerald dirty. Gerald did many things wrong, but not as badly as they claim he did. And I think he deserved better.
Yeah, some kind of Gerald actually getting to challenge her a bit, or her own self getting to challenge her and point out her failings in a way that weren't just, you just weren't girl boss enough. They stopped you girl bossing.
Where I wish they'd left the character of Gerald should have been him. And it's interesting that he's just in his boxers for most of the time. And then right at the end, as she's driving away, he's there fully clothed, waving. And I love that. I wish that's where they'd left him, that kind of character, because that's where he should be. It's like, this is a guy who gave you an incredibly comfortable life. He did his best by you in many ways, even if his best missed what you needed by miles. We do need a recut where Gerald is the hero. And in many ways, perhaps if they had succeeded in having a bit of stupping at the weekend, the oxytocin would have kicked in and she'd have felt better. But I don't think that's a good cure for... Anyway, so, me rabbiting on 7 or 8 out of 12 because Gerald deserved better and the ending was awful.
Okay, I'm interested in this. Forgive the sounds of typing, chat. I'm interested in what you think of this. I'll let this go for a bit. Controversial maybe, but let's see. Okay. Get voting, chat, because we'll be finishing reasonably soon. Yeah, so I am in a similar difficult situation to you. This film would be extremely high rated with only minor criticism. I'm talking very minor. Obviously, I would like Gerald to get more of a say and some more problematizing of her position. That would be kind of good.
Given that he's a projection of her own imagination, though, it is quite hard to do. But
yeah, it would have helped. But there's so much I love about the interplay between what she remembers and imagines and projects. I would have really liked that. I think it's incredibly tight storytelling. It doesn't waste time. It's not excessive in the elements it needs to be sensitive about. It gets straight to it and it keeps you really engaged with effectively a series of puzzles that she has to solve to survive, and then these projections that are helping her with her immediate thing are then a sort of natural way for her to start exploring her issues. So it's a fantastic setup. And the payoffs when they come are just amazing. I can't fault any of the acting. I think it's an absolutely brilliant performance from Carla Gugino. Bruce Greenwood, brilliant work. You know, everyone was fantastic here. The young Jessie was also really good and sold a really difficult scene.
Yeah, did incredibly well.
Yeah. And of course, Mike Flanagan just handled it all so very well, with his wonderful visual work, doing just great visual storytelling, doing so much of the work for you. After a scene where Jessie has decided to keep the secret, she just falls back and her hands spread like that. It's quite obvious, but it's showing her ending up in the position that Jessie ends up handcuffed in and stuck in. And it really frames that for her, that this experience has basically restrained her for her whole life. So that is all good stuff. And yeah, I think I would, if we cut it off after her car crash, easy 11. Very easy 11 out of 10. There's so much that's adorable and charming.
So pleased.
Yeah.
Easy 11.
Oh, no.
Sorry.
Oh, disgraceful. But unfortunately, there is that end. Maybe 10.5, because no, I'll leave it at easy 11. Except for the ending. When we include the ending, which makes it really hard to avoid some of the politics. 9. 9, but I'm on the border there. The ending is that bad, it could knock it down all the way to an 8. But I'm going to be generous, and I think I do have to stick at 9, because you could literally just stop watching.
It's like a friend of mine watches the sort of 70s adaptation of Tess of the D'Urbervilles and stops it at the point where Tess has just agreed to marry Angel Claire, and she's like, that's where it needs to end. They're about to get married and they're very happy. How nice. And the rest of the plot doesn't need to happen. I approve of that method of watching films. You're just like, yeah, they're happy. I like it.
All right, wifey, I've let the poll run. Look at that. Gerald is redeemed. 86%.
I'd like to say...
Based Gerald appreciators. Well done.
I'd like to say on the record...
We did it, chat.
I'd like to say on the record that, like, I don't think... Like, his approach to handling the situation isn't great. It's probably not ideal. I wouldn't say that he did nothing wrong, but I would say that equating him with a child molester and a necrophile is unfair. Let's put it that way. Is that fair summary? Like, I
think that is pretty fair. You do get very much. There's a big risk that this film comes off as all men bad.
Yeah,
and that is a massive risk. And it really would have helped to try and steer explicitly away from that at points. But yeah, I think there we go. So what I'm seeing basically are 7 to 9 on average. So I think we've got a decent consensus about this. Overall, we seem pretty darn positive. Now, I think that is pretty much everything for tonight, but we are super early. So there are 2 things I have to do, chat, and you know what they are. 1, horror homework for next week. I've got it set as a treat. We are doing Le Diabolique. I believe it is from 1955. And if you're wondering...
that's a bit recent.
If you're wondering, like, PH, why are you making us watch something from the 50s? Why this random French film from the 50s? This is a film that Psycho is a response to. Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. So hopefully that is intriguing enough. I've actually wanted to watch Le Diabolique for absolute ages. The director and Hitchcock had a bit of a correspondence. There is a book detailing them having a massive interview where they just go over all Hitchcock's films. It is good stuff. So I think this will be a really interesting one to discuss. So, Le Diabolique, 1955, and my money is on, you will find that probably quite easily on BitChute. There are some people who just put up loads of old films, so it should be quite easy. Do make sure you see the 1955 original. And the second thing, Slim, you've just been slowly increasing your vote. You went from a 7 to an 8.5, maybe a 9. Maybe it's growing on you. That does happen.
Not normally so quickly. But...
No, sometimes just the conversation will really make you love a film, and other times I've had to knock many burgers off just because someone pointed out glaring flaws that I was like, nah, it'll be fine. So I'm sure you'll find it. It's pretty darn well known. Now, the second thing I want to tell you before we sign off for the night is that I have a massive treat for you tomorrow, because this thing, and I don't know how, got through the copyright claims and content checks the first time with no issues whatsoever. I'm going to be able to show you my Get Out video tomorrow. We are premiering it at 8 p.m. It is a treat. It is long. It is not as long as the Invasion of the Body Snatchers one. It came in at about 52 minutes. So I'll start that at 8 p.m. Join me on the premiere. We're going to have a laugh. You can ask questions. If something didn't make sense, you can ask, and I'll try and explain it in chat. And then afterwards, you can join me on that Crime Guys quiz. That'll be on his channel. So we'll do some serious, deep analysis of an important film with no weird puerile humor whatsoever. Nothing hidden in that video. Don't even ask, why did you raise it? Kind of weird, bro. And then we'll just go over to TCG's channel and we'll just have fun. So that should be a really good Friday night. Yeah, Bilbo, I have got no idea how I slipped by Susan at all. I've got well-known music in there, which is usually what she gets me for.
Don't tell her, Pike.
I have really obscure covers of things that she wouldn't even know about. She's too mainstream. 8 p.m. my channel.
8 p.m. British time.
8 p.m. British time. Sorry, if that's what you mean. Yeah. So you should have seen it announced. Click the notification button to make sure you see it. I want everyone in. I'm really happy with this analysis. And I will leave it there. So you've got your horror homework. You know about the premiere tomorrow night. And we're going to have a good time. So I am going to leave it here. I will thank my wonderful wife here.
You're welcome. Gerald did some things wrong, but not everything.
Nice. And thank you, chat. I'm really glad you enjoyed this one. I'm absolutely chuffed, because I think not many people saw this. So it's really nice to spread the word. This is really one of the best, I think. All right. Thanks again. I'm going to sign off here. And I'll say, as always, thanks, y'all. Cheers.